Hello, my name is Michelle Shoemate. I'm a professor at Northwestern University and author of Networks for Social Impact. And I'm delighted today to be talking to you about how to make networks more sustainable. And particularly thinking about how do you create networks that are resilient to the types of changes that are common when more than one organization begins to coordinate and collaborate in order to make a bigger social impact. All networks for social impact encounter change. It's almost a constant. We have changes that result from members retiring and leaving the university, or changes that result from a new program being funded, or a new idea being crafted in order to expand upon a network's already existing efforts. Those types of changes are routine and ubiquitous. But what I'm talking about today is how to create a network that's resilient in the face of crossroads moments. Crossroads moments happen to every social impact network. And as I recently talked about in an article in Stanford Social Innovation Review, there are 5 common crossroads moments that, in my research, networks face. The first one that's very common for social impact networks is that funders decide to slash their support. For example, whenever I was working with an education network that was located in Flint, Michigan, in the United States, they had developed a robust program for educating students from cradle to career, only to have their most significant funder decide to pull out. Well, what were they to do? They were either going to have to shift the way that the network was going to function, or they were going to dissolve. And that's true with all crossroads moments. They really are the do or die type of moments for social impact networks. Either the network will significantly change the way it operates, or they will dissolve. Many social impact networks have faced a crossroads moment in the last few years as we've navigated the choppy waters of COVID, lockdowns, restrictions, masking, and continuous closures and revisions of how organizations operate. For many social impact networks that I studied, COVID was a crossroads moment. Some networks during that period of time basically shut down their operations. For example, throughout the United States, there are college access networks that are designed to try to ensure more students attend college. During these particularly challenging times, they found that local secondary schools weren't open to them coming inside and doing the types of events they had before. Some of these networks adapted and changed, but many went dormant for 2 years and are now finding themselves in the position of trying to restart their network from scratch. University networks in particular face the challenge of a visionary leader walking away. In research that was done about a consortium of Italian universities who were working together, they found that there was a small group of people, in fact, one major leader, who was really knitting together the whole thing. And when that leader left, the network quickly found itself in a crossroads moment. Many networks find themselves at a crossroads moment, not so much as because of an immediate event like COVID or something that was very recognizable, like a moment where a funder slashed their support, but they find themselves at a crossroad moment because members are tired. They began to meet and to have certain activities, and they didn't see necessarily a lot of progress in their work, and members began to burn out and then to slowly fall away, and membership meetings and different network meetings became less and less well attended. When you find yourself at a point where membership has significantly declined, you can find yourself in a crossroads moment. One of the most surprising crossroads moments that I've experienced was really around education networks in the United States when we conducted a study of 22 of those networks. For 3 of those networks, one of the largest organizations in the network decided that the network's efforts were great. In fact, the new programs that they had developed were important and actually a core of what the organization ought to be doing. And in each of these cases, the school district took the network's work and absorbed it, and it led to disbanding the network. In each of these cases, the network had to decide what to do. Would it disband, or would it significantly change how it operated? When networks for social impact reach a crossroads moment, they often have to consider 4 key questions in order to determine how the network will evolve moving forward. The first question is, why does our network even need to exist? This is especially important for networks who face that crossroads where a powerful member has absorbed their work. But if an organization's funding has significantly shifted, they might have to consider whether or not they can continue to operate using the same theory of change as they had before the crossroads moment. After considering this question, networks have to think about whether or not they need to organize themselves differently as a result of revisiting their theory of change. Consider for a moment a network called Age Well Pittsburgh. This network of senior serving organizations were trying to maintain a better well-being and quality of life for the seniors that they jointly served. Initially, they had received a large grant that allowed them as organizations to do team-based home visiting, which brought together members of each of their organizations into the homes of their clients. After that funding shifted away, they had to reconfigure their network to figure out how could they continue to still serve their seniors, but do it for less cost than they were able to do initially. They reconfigured their theory of change to talk about the alignment of their programs. They instead found ways to slash programs that were duplicated across the organizations and to develop a learning collaborative among organizational entry-level workers so that they could share information about their common clients. Through creating a software system that allowed them to do joint case management and through this common learning collaborative, they were still able to maintain a high quality of service for their clients, but using a different theory of change and configuring their network slightly differently. A third question that networks often have to address whenever they experience a crossroad moments is, how are they going to go about making decisions? How does an organization become a member? Are they going to vote on key decisions? When does the governing organization or set of or body of the network get to make a decision, and when does the full membership need to have say? Are there certain kinds of decisions where consensus needs to be reached before the network can move forward? All of these questions come back into view for networks after a crossroads moment, often because there's a reshaping of the membership of the network. Crossroads moments can lead former organizational members who are quite central in the work to leave and new members to join. And so thinking through these questions and the pros and cons of each of the options has to be revisited at the end of a crossroads moment. The last question, and perhaps the most central one to many networks leaders' minds as they face that crossroads moment, is how are they going to fund their work? And there's at least 3 different methods that I've seen networks for social impact choose. One is the grants-driven model, which has the advantage of a smaller amount of effort yielding often bigger returns in terms of the funds that are generated. However, this method has a downside of creating a boom and bust cycle for many networks. The boom happens when they are able to secure several large grants from different funders, and the bust happens whenever the renewal term comes and they may not be selected again. A second method is what I call the skin in the game model. The skin in the game model is where each of the member organizations contribute to the funds necessary to operate the network. Often these are a smaller set of funds that are generated by the network members, but this can be a more sustainable model than necessarily relying primarily on grants. A third model that often shows up is what's considered to be a program-related revenue model. A program-related revenue model means that the network produces products or services that they are able to offer for a fee to different beneficiaries or clients. And that revenue then helps to support the operating of the network. Whatever model is chosen, or whatever mix of models is chosen, often provides a new trajectory for the sustainability of the network until the next crossroads moment. One of the key considerations for many networks for social impact is in terms of a crossroads moment when they think about decision making and restructuring their network's efforts is around how the network will be governed. And there are three common models that international networks in particular use. The first one is what's called a network administrative organization. A network administrative organization is its own independent body whose sole job it is to manage the network. For example, the Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities operates using a network administrative organization model. That particular network has a staff of 4 or 5 individuals whose job it is to convene meetings, to offer programs and services, and to coordinate the functioning of the organization and what they're trying to achieve together in terms of advocacy. A second way that international networks sometimes govern their work is through a network of networks. This is particularly a poignant way to operate whenever there are differences among member needs across regions or across service areas. A network of networks is a more complicated model to sometimes put together, but functions basically as networks of organizations become members of local networks, and then the international network then has members of those regional or countrywide or sometimes subject area networks. A final model that is often used in international networks is the shared governance model. The shared governance model is where different organizations within the network take on different governance roles. One member might take on convening the different meetings that need to happen. Another might take on project management, and a third might be responsible for fund development. And through sharing the governance, these organizations then contribute to the overall functioning of the network in addition to their own operations. Well, how would an international network choose which of these governance models they would want to use? Well, there are 3 criteria that I'd suggest you might want to focus on. The first one is cost. A network of networks approach is the most expensive of these models because there's 2 layers of overhead. There's the overhead of each of the local networks, whether those are country, regional, or social issue specific networks. And there is the costs that happen as a result of the network of networks convening those sub-networks into the larger body. A second type of model actually is perceived as the least expensive, and that's the shared governance model. The reason that's perceived as less expensive is because the member organizations who are performing those duties bear the costs. A second criteria you might consider as you're thinking through the governance of an international network is resilience. Shared governance and network of networks models are most resilient because the risks and responsibility of governance are shared. For example, when we encountered networks in the education sector who had operated using a shared governance or network of networks model, when we studied them for 3 years, they were much more likely to endure than the network administrative organization model. One of the ways that happens in the networks of networks model in our experience is that sometimes particular networks at the local level or around a particular social issue go dormant for a period while others are able to maintain their operations and to grow their work. We've often seen networks where there might be a preschool network and a K through 12 network and a higher education network, all operating within a network of networks model, face a crossroads moment, and only the preschool or the college access network continued to operate for a period of time. But that kept life in the network and allowed them to continue to function even in the midst of a particular crisis. The last criteria that you might consider as you're evaluating which network governance model to adopt is discipline and efficiency. In our experience in our research, network administrative organization run networks are the most efficient and the most likely to drive results. And this is because you have a single group of people whose job it is every day to wake up and to focus the network's attention on the particular objectives that you're trying to achieve. Networks of networks can quickly become distributed in their efforts because each network becomes responsible for its own goals. And the network of networks then isn't really coordinating the goals of each of the individual networks. In contrast, a network administrative organization, by focusing the network members on fewer goals, is often able to drive results in a different way. Finally, as I wrap up this talk, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about particular characteristics and considerations of university networks. As somebody who's a professor at a university and has spent a lot of time investigating university networks, I've come to understand that there's 3 differences that they have in comparison to other types of social impact networks that are worthy of consideration. The first one is what's called a 2 tables problem. And the 2 tables problem really is about how decisions get made at the network level and what it means for organizational members. Almost every social impact network has a 2 tables problems, but they're particularly rampant whenever university partners are at the table. At the first table, the network table, representatives of organizations debate and discuss what different approaches they might take. They determine a theory of change. They begin to think about new initiatives and make decisions through hard-won conversation. But the decision-making isn't done there at that table. Instead, those organizational leaders now must travel back to their home organizations, back to their universities, and have a negotiation at a second table in their organization. I think that one of the reasons why university networks particularly struggle with the 2 tables problem is that those leaders who are at the tables are often not the most senior leader at the organization or the one that has the highest decision-making authority. Instead, we end up with individuals who are staff members, who are faculty members, who must then get an okay from their department chair or from their school head in order to get the go-ahead to use university resources in the ways that the network thinks is appropriate. One of the best ways to counter the 2 tables problem is to work carefully to make sure that the highest level decision maker doesn't send a delegate to the network table. Instead, decision makers from the organization who actually have the authority to be able to speak on the university's behalf, or at least the program or school's level's behalf, in some cases, should be at the network table. Otherwise, you end up with a very slow process of decision making and negotiation that never seems to end because every individual leader has to negotiate at both tables. The second thing that is often common in university networks is coopetition or irrelevance as attention. So what I mean by coopetition is that there are some places where universities absolutely compete. We compete for faculty members. We compete for the best researchers. Sometimes we compete for doctoral students or for undergraduate students to participate in our programs. Yet, when multiple universities sit at the same network table, they are also cooperating. One of the temptations for networks that have university members sitting at the table is to shy away from the areas where there might be direct competition between universities. However, if you back too far away from those areas where we compete, The decisions that we're often making at those network tables then are irrelevant to the core business operations of the university. That puts the network in a precarious place of being tangential to the actual university's considerations and very easily backed away from when other priorities arrive. One of the challenges then moving forward is for university networks to figure out ways that they can fruitfully collaborate while still focusing on the core things that universities do, including research and teaching. Third, one of the key challenges for university networks in particular are, to be fair, people like me, professors. We are often very long tenured members of the organization. We are with sometimes universities for 10, 20. I recently had a colleague who retired at over 50 years with the university. And so that makes us potentially very stable partners or representatives in the network. However, faculty members are often distracted by other concerns. They have responsibilities for teaching, service, and research that have nothing to do with the network often. And so because it's an extra duty, they may not be as focused on the network's key operations as others might be. In contrast, you can sometimes attract staff or administrators from universities who might see the network's work as part of their job, part of what they do. And as such, they end up having much more direct engagement with the network. But those positions tend to turn over more frequently than faculty positions do. So all three of those considerations are things to take into account as you move forward in designing your network. The final thing that I want to talk to you about is through an example. I talked briefly when I was talking about network governance about the Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, which is a collaboration of independent colleges and universities in the state of Wisconsin in the United States. One of the reasons why I want to bring this up is that they've really figured out ways to address some of these two-table co-opetition and faculty member versus administrator problems in the structuring of their network, and maybe there's some lessons learned here. One of the ways that they first started out their work is to think about organizing collaborative programs to save members time and money. The reason why that was really effective is that they were able to show how membership in the network benefited each individual organization. And that helped to maintain the commitment of administrators in the organization and the universities and colleges to continue to come to the network meetings and to continue to move forward. Over time, after having built the trust and slowly becoming more ingratiated into the university systems, they've added additional priorities. Those include advancing affordability and accessibility to students, and advocating for policy change at independent colleges and universities to support student opportunity. These particular initiatives were only possible because they found ways to make sure that membership in WACU was worth it. So my final admonition to you as a network that includes many university partners is find ways to make it worth it for your members in addition to advancing your mission. In doing so, you may find that your network maintains a level of interest and sustainability that will last you well into the future.